the doctrine that this was focused through was something called the Lamb's War, and it was Christ's war against the devil out in the world and in people. And it combined with a very radical sense of outreach, going and declaring to everyone that Christ had come to teach his people himself. Between 1854 and 1855, I think this was William Dewsbury again. William Dewsbury is a really great preacher. It was. Now is the Lord appearing in this day of his mighty power, and exalting Jesus Christ to be King of kings, to lead his army. He hath raised up in the north of England, and is marching towards the south. They were getting ready to evangelize London. He's marching to the south in the mighty power of the living word of God, which is sharp as a two-edged sword, to cut down the high and the low, the rich and the poor, the priests and the people, and all powers in the land. Now, that's really out there rhetoric. We're hearing some rhetoric like that today with a different temper. But what he's talking about is a gang of preachers going to London to convert the great city of Satan. Now, here's another piece that was put together I think in 1669, I think. Anyway, it doesn't matter. John Audlin, who very much trembled, and trembling, that's where Quakers got their name. It's a little bit like frontier revivals, where women started getting the shakes and throwing their hairpins everywhere. What the trembling was the nervous tension involved in saying, Lord, I really am a sinner, and here I am standing in front of God. And which was, of course, the experience they were actually having. John Audlin, who very much trembled, stood up full of dread and shining brightness on his countenance, lifted up his voice as a trumpet, and said, I proclaim spiritual war with the inhabitants of the earth who are in separation from God. Some fell on the ground, others crying under the sense of the opening of their spiritual states. Oh, the tears, sighs, and groans, tremblings, and mournings in the sense of our spiritual wants and necessities. Now, that kind of passion created, a moral temper that managed to carry Quakers along as a, quote, peculiar people for a couple hundred years. I want to real quickly give you one more little example. This is more the kind of evangelical commitment people could make. Let's call it F. This is Mary Fisher, who died in 1698. She may have been born as early as 1623, but it seems improbable because it would mean she had 3 children after the age of 40. So I'm guessing she was born around 1630. But she was a servant in the household of a member of the gentry, and was convinced with them on one of George Fox's preaching trips in 1651. She was imprisoned in York Castle. In 1653, she went to challenge the students at Cambridge University, where by the mayor's order she was stripped to the waist and whipped through the town. In 1656, she and Anne Austin were the first friends to sail via Barbados to Boston, where they were jailed, had 100 Quaker books they had brought burned by the hangman, and were banished. In 1657, she went to the West Indies. In 1657. 57-58, she undertook a mission to the Near East. Near Smyrna, Mary Fisher and Beatrice Beckley jumped ship and went to the camp of the Sultan Mohammed IV at Adrianople, delivering a message from the great God. She was heard with courtesy and returned safely to England. Then in 1662, she got married, had 3 children. After her husband's death in 1675, she married again and moved to South Carolina. Now, that's a life. Once she got a big family of children, she did tone it down a little bit. But she and her granddaughter, Sophie Hume, provided for a century the only leadership for a meeting of friends in Charleston and entertained shipwrecked Quaker travelers. Now, I have to admit that, I'm a big fan of early Quakerism, but some of that language makes me a little nervous. It does sound a little bit like some of our presidential candidates. Over the years, Quakers toned it down. The Enlightenment came along. Some Quakers tried to rationalize the whole thing. They adopted the 17th century criticism of their basic position that they were glorifying just the natural operations of conscience. So you get some very conscientious Quakers. But the modern friends, the thing really starts with social economic change led by capitalism and particularly probably agricultural commercial capitalism in this country. But from the beginning of the 19th century, and you could trace the beginnings of this further back, but from the beginning of the 19th century, there became increasingly conflict among friends over questions of religious orthodoxy, which was a conflict between people who, particularly I'm thinking of one English merchant, who wanted to fit in with the rest of the crowd and thought that the Baptists and Methodists, they're just about the same as Quakers, and we can't be so different. Then on the other hand, you had people like in America, the preacher Elias Hicks, and Kathy read a brief quote of his, who was a farmer in upstate New York and represented not the sort of comfortably well-off Philadelphia wheat merchant kind of person, but rural communities, that were still very much turned in on themselves, saw their Quaker religion as an inward spiritual life in a small community. And Hicks, who was also influenced by the Enlightenment, continued to insist on the primacy of the inward light and the idea of continuous revelation. So Hicks became, among other things, pretty much a Unitarian, which made him anathema to people who were pushing, an increasingly, they didn't really change Quaker theology, but they wanted to express more and more in ways that would be compatible with the Baptists and Methodists and other evangelicals who were so important in England and increasingly in America among, the middle-class business community. So eventually there was a split. And then among the Orthodox, there was another split because there were people who thought, what we continue to need is traditional worship at the same time that the Orthodox people were beginning to have ministers, worship leaders, and meet in a thing called a Friends Church. Now, in this country, that then led to a confrontation with revivalism, Dwight Moody and Finney and those people. And many friends, there's further west, small communities, many friends had the experience of instantaneous conversion at revivals and introduced revivalism into Quakerism. So that now, in this country, we've got liberal or East Coast friends who have unprogrammed meetings. They meet in silence, are almost without, as a group, almost without a religious doctrine beyond the idea of the inner light, however you interpret it. Then you have Orthodox friends focused in the Midwest, particularly in Indiana, who have churches and worship leaders, but a fundamentally mainstream kind of Christianity, or what used to be called mainstream. And then there are evangelical friends who run a span from approximately the theology of a conservative Methodist to genuine, right on the verge of fundamentalism. And then you have conservative friends who have a Christian, basically Christian theology, but still meet in an unprogrammed silent worship. That was the kind of Quakers I first met. And then you've got holiness friends, who are perhaps in terms of tradition very extreme. And then you have people like the Beanites. I just love that name. The Beans were in the 1880s, and they started the first college friends meeting. It was very liberal, and so now there are lots of college friends meetings. But the idea of the light and the idea of the testimonies, now summed up with the acronym of SPICE: simplicity, peace, integrity, community, and equality. Sum up friends. The last thing I want to say is that it's important for people in our worship group and people who meet us and think that, well, these are friends, to understand that the kind of Quakers we are dying out. There are about 350,000 Quakers. Half of them live in East Africa, most of those in Kenya. They're all either Orthodox or evangelical friends. In the United States, Orthodox and evangelical friends are probably 3/4 of the Quakers. I think there are probably about 20,000 of us. England has about 15,000 friends left, and they're all in this liberal kind of tradition.
When you say us, which?
I mean the liberal, the silent meeting, unprogrammed,
Lewisburg group.
Lewisburg friends.
Yeah, I
Lewisburg style friends.
Just wasn't sure which
Right,
format
right.
you guys use.
And actually there are 4 Quaker groups in West Virginia, and I think all 4 of them are right out of the cave.
Right. All of the West Virginia Friends groups, worship groups, and actual meetings are unprogrammed.
Yeah.
Some of them belong to yearly meetings that are have programmed and unprogrammed. But it's easy to see how that would work out, because I first got interested in Quakerism when I was about 11 years old, down in I was living outside Charleston, and I don't think there was a Quaker anywhere. I didn't actually, except for a rather conservative, middle of the country Quaker theologian that came to speak when I was in college. I don't think I ever even saw a Quaker, at least that I knew about, until the fall of 1967, when I started attending a conservative. That it wasn't, people weren't conservative, but institutionally it was part of the North Carolina Yearly Meeting Conservative at Duke.
What happens at the Lewisburg Quaker meeting?
Well, nothing seems to happen. I mean, we get there and we break the rules by having chit chat when we first get there. I mean, we're spread out, we don't see each other. It's not like a community where people saw each other every day. So we chit chat, which you're not supposed to do. The first person comes in, the meeting is started. But then we sit in silence. And silence is not an end in itself. It's supposed to be people not meditating, but clearing their minds of all the internal monologue and rubbish that might keep you from hearing the still small voice. Or
Why do you say that's not meditation?
Yeah, really.
well, the main reason I say it is that the Dalai Lama was somewhere once, years ago. I'm not even sure it's our Dalai Lama, but a Dalai Lama was somewhere years ago at a meeting, at a religious meeting that included Quakers and others and some Zen Buddhists and whatnot. And he remarked, but we're truly different. We're meditating and you're waiting on the Lord.
Okay, two different types of meditation.
Well, I mean,
Buddhist style and others.
well, I think that's a perfectly reasonable way to go. I personally kind of try to avoid it because I want to stress that what Quakers traditionally said was you were shutting yourself up in order to resign your selfhood to the Lord, and the Lord will speak to you. Now, I understand that would be a good, certainly Hindu meditation. But anyway, yeah, I wouldn't argue with you for a minute.
And then when,
I'm sorry, Randy, how long do you sit in silence?
Well,
An hour.
we try to survive for an hour, and what's supposed to happen here, I think this is where Randy was about to go. What's supposed to happen here is that someone enunciates a message from the Lord.
I gotta go to the bathroom.
And so someone will speak. Now we're a very quiet group. If you went to a Quaker meeting at Haverford College with all them university professors, they have what's called a popcorn meeting. Because you're supposed to wait. If someone speaks, I think that sort of the traditional mannerly ideal is you wait at least 5 minutes, so that whatever they say could speak. And you're never supposed to respond to somebody else.
You're only supposed to share
Your own voice.
your
Yeah.
own voice.
Which of course is a voice that you were given by the Spirit. But Haverford, you got all those professors with political opinions. So it's very different. I went to a couple of those meetings and I couldn't do it anymore. I didn't like that at all. Now, what is sought is what's called a gathered meeting, where pictures of the Pentecost, when after Jesus' resurrection and all, and they picture the flames over the crowd, the flames of the Spirit, and friends in meetings that have really gotten to know each other. I've never had this experience myself, but friends in meetings that have really gotten to know each other, they talk about, you could just feel it. You could feel it. Fred spoke, and then the Spirit ran through the room like electricity. And, again, however you explain it, I think that's a real experience. I've had several times the sense of a meeting, suddenly being energized to a degree. But the idea that you knew that most everybody in the room was experiencing the Spirit at the same moment is not something that I've had. But that's sort of the goal of a Quaker meeting. I mean, the immediate goal.
That's interesting, because it's kind of the thing that does happen when we do group meditation. That sense of oneness, if you like, of the whole group, and the whole group feeling something is happening.
Right.
There are also meetings for business worship, which we have once a month, where we may talk, just like our board meeting, where we may talk about things. And, so, I was at my,
in your group over there.
9 and 10 occasionally.
Had a group that broke off from the Unitarians here that meet every Sunday, and sit in silence for an hour. And if somebody during that hour has a thought but nobody can repeat or talk about it. They just say, my mother is going through some blah, 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 you know, and nobody says anything. So that's kinda like what you're saying here, and, it's been fascinating hearing you talk today, because every religion and everything that I've ever learned or heard about is interconnected. Everything, I mean, Quakerism, us, just the, you know, it's fascinating.
one thing I didn't read is a quote, but it probably is my all-time favorite quote about Quakerism is, it said Quakerism didn't get rid of the priests because they don't have ministers, the emperor. They got rid of the laity. They really do see every person as someone who is able to speak the word of God to others. So it's a group of priests in some sense getting together. And I think in that sense, that's like the UUs, you know, that we all feel called to do good.
Very soon, John is gonna come and talk about Buddhist meditation.
Yes.
I don't know when that is, it's not too far away.
It's probably in the newsletter.
I think I'm gonna wrap this up because we got the congregation meeting.
Right, right. Yeah,
Stuff to
sure.
work through. And we will extinguish the chalice.
Okay.
And instead of doing the SLT, let's read the quote that's at the bottom of your page here. Of the chalice quote. And remember to say for the short congregation meeting, Quakers are not for peace, but rather know in the deepest sense of the word, that peace is wholly inherited as part of a just society. By Pete Dandelion, and yes, that really is his name.
Well, he adopted that name. That's the one he really goes by.
But that's what he goes by.
I also wanted to mention, you do not have to be a voting member to stay for the meeting that we will be having now. So everyone in the room is welcome to
And I
stay.
do want to thank
I wanna
Wood
say
though,
thank you.
very good. Very good.
Enlightening.
You can tell Wood was a former professor.
I could see him stirring that crowd.
I'd be so April, we're gonna have a start.
Let's just go ahead and start the meeting. I'll call the meeting to order. Betsy, you're-
12:30.
12:30, okay. Call the meeting to order. One order of business that we have is to bring everyone up to date on the property at 312 Maxwell Hill that we were selling to and trying to work out a contract with Bob Worth. I really want to thank Randy for his leadership in taking on the burden of trying to move us forward in this. It has been a grueling process, as I think board members are aware, particularly, and I think everyone here realizes that this has been going on and on and on. For those of you who do not